so you're not left having to breathe in the smog. My computer has a warning right on the bottom of it saying, air very poor, don't go outside. So air conditioning raises electric bills. And for the first time in over 2 decades, 2 new nuclear plants are coming online in Georgia. Now, there are a number of people who believe that nuclear power is the type of power that will help our environment and help our society. But there's a number of problems with it. The first one is the outright cost. So when these 2 plants were designed and they were projected to be built, they said it would cost $14 billion and it would be ready to produce electricity in 2016. The plants still haven't turned on to generate electricity. It's now 2023. And the cost overruns have more than doubled the cost of the plant. It's now almost $35 billion. And that includes subsidies from the federal government. The federal government is guaranteeing some of the loans so that the Georgia power companies that own the plants can go ahead and continue building them. Now, these new plants were supposed to have solved the old problem of the cost of nuclear power. There's a Harvard Business Review article that says the major cost for nuclear power is what they call the soft cost, the design costs, the cost of getting the land ready, of getting the permitting, of doing all the safety inspections. So these plants were what was called a new wave of modular design. And it was supposed to solve the problem of nuclear power being 2, 3, even as much as 10 times as expensive as other ways to generate electricity. But it failed. There were 30 new nuclear plants in America which had permits to build plants like this. Of them, 28 were canceled after seeing the problems at the Georgia plant. So the modular design, the reason why that's important is because we're going to see that Mr. Gates and Mr. Buffett are all saying that that's what their new plan is a modular design, and that's why they should be allowed to go ahead with it. But who pays for the cost overruns? And this is where it gets a little complicated. In the United States, there's really 2 ways of power being generated. One is by the utility, which has, it's called a rate of return. So the utility that gets the power to your door, that meters it, that bills you, in some states, it also owns the generating plants. In other states, like in Pennsylvania, where the electric industry was redesigned so that generation is separate from the utility, in those cases, the plants have to compete directly with the other types of plants. And the Public Utility Commission, although in Georgia it's called the Public Service Commission, the Public Utility Commission can't automatically pass the cost on to ratepayers. But in Georgia, because it's a unified approach, and the power companies own the generating plants, they own the transmission lines, and they own the lines to your home, the Public Utility Commission there, as I said, the Public Service Commission there, can sort directly for the utility mistakes. Traditionally, what happens is a utility company will build the power plant, then go before the Service Commission or the Utility Commission and argue, we spent this money and now we have to get it back, plus a rate of return that's equal to what's called the cost of capital. So you can kind of look at a little bit more than the current interest rate. But the cost overruns were so bad at these plants, and it was so late, that the utility power, not only were these plants bailed out by the federal government, which was bailed out under President Obama, but the Georgia Service Commission also bailed them out and allowed the utility to collect $4.1 billion in advance charges. Now that breaks down to $913 for every ratepayer. So every ratepayer is paying $913 more per year because the utility company blew it, because they made mistakes, because they couldn't figure out how to get this built, and because they didn't give up. If they had given up, it would have cost far less for consumers than to go forward. Now the estimate is that Georgia Power, which owns 50% of the plants, other 50% is owned by other utility companies, could earn an extra $9.4 billion in profit over 60 years if they're allowed to charge for all the overspending they've done. Customers could pay 35.7 billion overall, and that's 20.5 billion more than was originally projected. And here's how that works. In states like Georgia, which are rate of return industries, the utility goes before the Public Service Commission and says, here's how much money we spent. We spent $100 billion, and now we need a rate of return on that. Public Service Commission says, well, of that $100 billion you spent, we're going to say 10% of that wasn't right. You shouldn't have spent it. So you're only going to be allowed to collect on the 90 billion that you spent. You can see right in that formula what happens is there's an incentive for utilities to build the most costly, the most expensive, the hardest to build utility plants, because 10% of $1 million is not nearly as much as 10% of $1 billion. Now, the argument that we're going to hear time and time again about nuclear power and why we should have it going forward is it's carbon free. It doesn't burn anything. And while that is partly true, the part that it doesn't burn anything is that it's carbon free is not true. Just very quickly, what nuclear power does is it sets up a controlled nuclear bomb, and that creates a tremendous amount of heat. That heat boils water or boils salt or boils some type of metal, and that metal turns to steam, water, steam, salt, steam, and that turns a turbine. In the same way that the wind turns a turbine, or hydropower turns a turbine, or natural gas plant boils water and that turns a turbine, that's what nuclear power is doing. The difference is that nuclear power is one of the dirtiest things to mine. So right now, most of the mining comes from the southwest of the United States. For years and years and years, most of it was on the Navajo reservations until the mining operations polluted the groundwater for the Navajo. And the Navajo have since not allowed there to be any uranium mining. But that doesn't really stop the mine companies from mining around the Navajo Nation. Like a lot of other examples, we see this type of environmental racism where all of the problems are being placed on people with marginal political power and who have are at greatest risk of suffering from the pollution. So we know that the mining of uranium is incredibly unsafe, incredibly polluting. And what we're told about that is, don't worry, at some point they'll figure that out, or they'll clean up the sites, or there'll be some way of doing it so that we don't have to worry about it. But as of right now, when people talk about nuclear power being non-polluting, they're missing the two most important parts. One is, how do we get uranium? And two is, what do we do with the waste? And that's the third part. So what happens to the nuclear waste? And again, when we think about how nuclear power works, what we're thinking about is nuclear, the radiation, the mining of uranium is put into pellets. The pellets are put into these tubes in the plants, in these things that are encased, and they allow for a reaction to take place, a controlled nuclear bomb, and then that boils the water. After 4 to 6 years, depending upon the usage, the nuclear power, the uranium, is used up. The amount of uranium that can be used to create the reaction is gone. And so then you have all of the waste. Each year, we collect roughly 2,000 metric tons of waste. Right now, as we're talking, there's about 90,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel. It's not talking about the federal government and the bombs. It's not talking about waste from the hospitals and doctors. This is just nuclear waste that comes from nuclear power plants, about 90,000. We as a society have not figured out what to do with that. And because some of the nuclear waste has a half-life of over 10,000 years, and it remains dangerous for as much as 50,000 years, we have to think very carefully about where can we put these waste, where we can put the waste. Right now, because we don't have a solution, we don't know what to do with it, there are 77 sites in 35 states that are holding on to it. They're just keeping it in basically a barrel. And they're saying, one day we'll figure out what to do with the waste. But until then, we're just going to keep storing it here. They get called, it gets put in a pool of water so it doesn't overheat, or it gets put in the dry cast at the reactor site. And those are good for 10 to 20 years, but the nuclear waste is going to be there for at least 10,000 years. So that isn't a solution. And the cost of storing the nuclear waste isn't factored into the cost of the electricity. So when we think about nuclear power to generate electricity, the things to keep in mind is, one, it's much more expensive. It's 2 to 10 times as expensive as any other type of generation of electricity, whether it be solar or hydro, or whether it be natural gas or anything else. It's significantly more expensive because it costs so much more to build. Second, to get the uranium, it's incredibly polluting, and it leaves behind radioactive waste, pollutes the groundwater, and that's happening in parts of the country where very few people live, but right along the Navajo border. And again, the Navajo have removed the uranium mining from their lands. Now, the federal government recognizes that nuclear power has supporters, but because it's so expensive and because it can't sell electricity at anywhere close to the price for other plants, the federal government continues to subsidize electricity. And in the most recent President Biden infrastructure bill, $6 billion has been set aside to help states build nuclear power plants. Again, President Obama bailed out the plants in Georgia. He went ahead and said, we're going to go and guarantee their loans so that they can get a lower interest rate. President Biden has now put $6 billion into nuclear power. The states of New Jersey, Connecticut, Illinois, and Pennsylvania have come up with plans to subsidize nuclear power so that it can have more of an effective life. In Ohio, where it was so bad, the bill was so bad, that the Speaker of the Ohio House has been convicted of accepting bribes from the power companies so that he could bail out the nuclear power plants. Now, after he was arrested, the bill was amended, and no longer will the power companies get the subsidies for the nuclear power. But finally, nuclear power is still an industry that takes things out of the ground. It is not renewable. It may extend the life by having another source of something that comes out of the ground in extractive technology. But just like we will run out of oil, we can argue about when, just like we will run out of oil and just like we will run out of natural gas, we will run out of uranium. These are short-term solutions that cost consumers significantly more money and also create this horrible problem going forward for the next 10,000 to 100,000 years. There are a number of people, because so much money is involved. As I said, when you build a nuclear power plant, there's the construction, there's the financing, there's the companies that make the money. And when we talk about $35 billion, we're talking about a tremendous amount of money. And even if you take 1 or 2% of that and use it for lobbying or use it to make campaign contributions, you can see how powerful a lobby nuclear power is. But it's not in the public's interest. It's not in the ratepayers' interest. And the reason why I'm reporting on this is because Bill Gates and Warren Buffett have both said that they're going to be investing money in building one of these modular plants, and they're going to put it in Wyoming where no one's going to see it. But they have invested their money. Now they're claiming because it's quote unquote carbon free and it doesn't pollute, doesn't create the type of pollution that a natural gas plant does, that it's better for the environment. And so they're going to be making this huge push with campaign contributions, with hiring lobbying companies. If you go online now and you look at YouTube, you will see video after video of people discovering that you can take the nuclear waste, process it, and then put it back in the plant and use it again. All of those YouTubes are paid for significantly by the industry, and they don't mention all the problems that come about because of reprocessing of fuel. And the final thing is, it's always, no one wants to see a nuclear accident. They're devastating and horrible. But the belief that it won't happen here is misguided. There have been 57 separate accidents since 3 Mile Island. There is no perfection. There is no way to guarantee going forward that there will not be a problem. And creating an entire industry around the belief that no mistake will ever be made makes absolutely no sense. So that's what we're looking at. If Mr. Gates and Mr. Buffett are successful, we're looking at our electric bills going up. We're looking at more pollution, more waste, and more pollution on the Navajo land.
Now, when we talk about no pollution, I'm reading articles from just the last week or so about Fukushima and how they're going to put 1 million tons of water from the plant back into the ocean.
Right. So maybe we should tell our viewers a little about this. This is a nuclear power plant in Japan that, again, was guaranteed to be safe, but they didn't take into consideration earthquakes or tsunamis. So the plant was at the center of an earthquake. The tidal wave, the tsunami came, wiped out all of the safety precautions, all the pumps. The plants not only melted down, but they exploded. So you had both of the horrible things that we worry about happen simultaneously. The core of the plant, that nuclear bomb that is controlled, was not controlled any longer and actually melted through the casement and the floor. And that created hydrogen, which went up to the top of the plant and then blew the tops off. There's no solution. Nobody knows what to do. So what they're doing, as you said, they're just releasing all this radioactive gas into the air and all the radioactive water they've been trying to use to cool the plant to stop further damage. They're just releasing it into the ocean, meaning that none of the fish from that area will be safe. All the fishermen, or fisher people, I should say, have lost their jobs. You can't live in the area. And this was not a Russian design like Chernobyl. This was something, again, that we were told was safe, that they took every precaution. And that's one of the lessons to learn, I think, is that nothing is fail-proof. There is not a single technology that will never fail. And the question is, what is the cost of that failure? And the Japanese plant, what we're seeing is the cost of that failure is tremendously high and will be with those people for literally hundreds of years.
The cleanup in Fukushima, since it happened in 2011, has cost $90 billion.
Right.
$90 billion.
And that's, again, what we're looking at if something like that happens here. And we have plants that are in areas in California where they're on the fault lines. And again, we hope that nothing happens, but we shouldn't be surprised that something can go wrong.
Yeah, because it has
right.
multiple times.
Yes.
So, Lance, why are we seeing this now? And I think I know the answer. But why are we seeing these new power plants when, we could be looking at hydroelectricity, solar? What's the issue here?
The nuclear industry is making use of quote unquote clean power, carbon-free generation. And they're just using that as a way of getting federal dollars, getting state dollars, and getting the permission to build the plants. Again, if you think about it from their point of view, and I don't mean to be overly cynical, and I don't mean to be in the conspiracy theory of the world, but if you're a business person and you get a 10% guaranteed return, are you going to build a plant for $1 million, or are you going to build a plant for $10 million? Well, you have to answer to your stockholders, and your stockholders always want more dividends. They always want greater profits. And so that you are driven to invest in the most expensive power plant that you can find, that you can justify, so that you can get a much bigger profit. 10% of $1 million is nowhere near 10% of $1 billion. And I think it's really that simple. The amount of money involved is just unbelievable. And this is not the first bailout of the nuclear industry that we've had. Many people remember when Pennsylvania went through its restructuring of the electric industry. At that point, it was PECO, and now it's a different company. But what they said was, we have to bail them out because their investments in nuclear power were so unwise and so uneconomic that they had what they called stranded costs. And consumers had to pay for the mistakes of investing in nuclear power. And all of the states that deregulated their electric industry forced consumers to pay for the nuclear power plants. So we know nuclear power is not less expensive. We know it's more expensive, but under the belief that for some people that it's carbon free, and the belief that technology will always solve everything, we see a resurgence.
Now, I remember this is years ago. One of the first conversations you and I ever had was about using the pumps in the river, in the Schuylkill River, to power parts of Philadelphia.
Right. So when I was fortunate enough to work for Council President Clark, we did one of those pilot programs. And that is when they were rebuilding the locks on the Schuylkill River. We got people to come in and give us opportunities to generate power from that. The problem that we have so far is that the water department under Mayor Kenny has lacked the imagination to make use of that. So there are tremendous technologies. For example, the city of Portland, Oregon generates electricity from its water mains. The water flows through the mains. They have small generators in the mains, and they generate enough electricity to pay for the electricity the water department needs. In New York City, there's a company that's putting underwater windmills, and probably shouldn't call them windmills, but they look like windmills underwater to generate electricity on the East River, which is like the Delaware. It's a tidal river, so it goes back and forth, and it's always generating electricity. All of those emerging technologies are much better because they're renewable and they don't create the same risk. You know, if an underwater windmill breaks, that's bad, but the risk is not much. If the nuclear power plant has a leak, the problem is large. But we have to have the imagination and we have to have the willpower to tell our government, don't listen to the nuclear power lobbyists. Don't get confused about renewable versus a nuclear. What we want is a non-extractive technology that allows us to plan for the future, a safe future where we're not planting bombs for our children's children's children.
Well, imagine, putting some of these pumps in the Schuylkill and powering Antioch on a one-time investment. To me, that just seems like an easy thing to try, right?
Well, again, if we had a water department under, and I'm going to cross my fingers and I'll say it out loud. I'm hoping that the next mayor will be more creative and actually care. It's hard to say because it appears to me, and I think it appears to other people, that Mayor Kenny has not been actively participating in government for the last few years. And as the water department continues to raise rates year after year after year, you would hope that someone would step in and say, well, let's figure out what we can do here. Let's use this technology to our advantage. If Florida and the Southwest are all going to have tremendous problems because they don't have the water that their population needs. They're drawing down what are called the aquifers, the underground water. We're blessed with tremendous amount of clean, good water from the Schuylkill, from the Delaware, from where we are. And we're not using that as an asset, and we should be.
Because it just seems to me, try it. Try a small program. If it doesn't work, try something else.
Absolutely.
But we don't have to be going the same route we've been doing because it's clearly, first of all, not cost effective, and it's certainly not safe. So, all right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for telling us about that. And it's something we're going to be keeping an eye on because it's important. Even if it's not happening here, we face the consequences of what's happening in other places as well.
And again, Mr. Gates and Mr. Buffett control a large amount of space on the news. And when they come forward with this new plan, this new modular design of what they call a salt nuclear power plant, there are people who are going to start saying we should think about that. And I would like us to think about what it's going to cost and what it means for the future. And as you say, we should be looking at technologies that help and not harm.
And let's face it, Pennsylvania has this nasty thing where if there's a really bad idea out there, they make it their business to replicate it. So
it ends up on the state flag.
Exactly. So what folks really do need to make sure that you're letting your representatives know that whether or not this modular nuclear power plant, is even looks like it's successful, we should be looking at other technologies. This is not necessarily what they mean by green jobs.
Right. So last week on the program, we played the first half of our interview with GOP mayoral candidate David Ho. And now we would like to play you the second half of our interview with David Ho here on All Talk Radio.
Okay. So another thing that I kind of wanted to touch on with you is, are you getting support from Philadelphia's Republican Party? Because you haven't had that always. Are you getting support from them? And will that support take the form of money? Because you mentioned that you don't necessarily want to go the dark money route and that it should be about, friends and family and stuff, but you're going to be dealing with an opponent that does have a PAC. So I guess, how are you going to get around that?
So I want to clarify that I'm saying that nowadays elections seem to be that we've gone past like how much you can raise to like what super PAC is going to get behind you. In my case, I don't have any super PACs, and I don't really have any like large PACs either. So I already calculate that I'm going to have less funds in the general election. Is the Republican Party going to help me? That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to it. Yes, I have had my differences with the Republican Party of Philadelphia, mainly around the fact that I was not one of their guys, so to speak. And sometimes parties like to have party discipline. And that means that someone believes that they're the one to give the orders. And they're not an elected official. They're a party official. That's different from me. Right now, I'm a Republican running to be the mayor of basically a majority Democratic city, and not by a little bit, right? Overwhelmingly Democrat. I'm not trying to change people's registrations. What I tell them is, the values that you see within the Democratic Party, the Democratic philosophy, the Democratic perspective, they are wonderful things, especially when we talk about humanity and compassion and all those things, equality and righting wrongs. Do you see that in your neighborhood? And the answer is no. I don't have to wait for the answer. Yeah, we're a city of neighborhoods, and so yeah, there'll be a few neighborhoods where people love their everything's great and it's fantastic for them. But all across our city, that's not what people see. And they want to see it. And I'm saying to them, who is going to deliver that to you? Because time and time again, it has not been delivered. And there's no reason why it hasn't been delivered. It should be delivered. It's required to be delivered. So for me, as a elected official, I am not touting some type of national script or statewide script. So that takes me at odds with the party. And the party looks at its assets, right? So for example, the parking authority. At that time, it was perceived by the party to be one of their assets. However, when they're asking me to raise parking rates and raise taxes, I look at the money that they're collecting off the curbs of our city, and I say, oh, that money's supposed to go to the school district. And I'm an attorney, so I understand why it's supposed to go to the school district. I'm simply saying that the way the parking authority was seized and what has happened to it in the historical process is wrong. And the city should have a level of control so it can know what money is there, where it's going, and we can get the portion of the money, which is large, to the school district. That's actually what it was supposed to do. Since it is not doing that, as a legislator, I like to introduce a bill to take back control of on-street parking. And then we could get into a cooperation agreement. But because of that, that is seen as like an aggressive move on the Republican Party. And we've had other differences as well. So as you know, I've been opposed by the Republican Party for basically all of my elections. And most recently, They put out mailers without me on it. I'm the endorsed mayoral candidate, but I'm not on the mailers that they send out, which I think, it is not a good idea because it doesn't get people excited to come out and vote. And then on the election day sample ballot, I was the only person not listed on it. So there was no button number or name or anything. So, but they tell me that they are with me for the general. But that really has to do with they wanted me to unendorse somebody. And that person was someone they recruited to run for office. They had a falling out with him. I wasn't there. I don't know anything about it. But I did endorse that person, for city council at large. And I saw no legitimate reason to unendorse someone that was endorsed. And quite frankly, sometimes they want me to endorse people that aren't really candidates. They're really just there to put a name on the ballot. And I don't do that because there is another person. And that person might be a Democrat or whomever they are. But I really endorse people because I think they will do a good job, or I know who they are, or they offer the voter something. But I don't want to just go through kind of endorsing people because that is something that someone asked me to do without really a good reason. The party generally has not been able to raise money, and typically I put out a pretty good field operation. I didn't in the primary because I didn't really need to. I didn't have an opponent. And in the primary, I'm not really concerned about losing the primary. I'm concerned about speaking to the public. And that's really the important thing about the primary. It's not so much that I have to speak to Republicans only. I have to speak to everybody. And I think that in this city, if you are a Republican or independent, you will get a ton of information about the Democratic candidates. You can't vote for them in the primary, but you will have a chance to vote for them in the general. But that's a good time to look at the apples versus apples, right? But in this city, there's no comparable amount of information that is being put to the public about me. And therefore, many people don't even know I'm in a race. They think that the entire race consists of the Democratic candidates because that's all the profiles, that's all the Inquirer does, it's KYW profiles. And there are, I think, maybe like 6 televised debates, and I was invited to 1. And there's 5 without me, right? So I think that in this situation, the Republican Party could have distributed at least to the Republican voters that they're reaching through the mail, that we do have Councilman David O, you know him, he's running for mayor. And then to have me on the sample ballot and have people out distributing. But I don't think they really had too many people distributing at the polls. So I will take care of that myself, as I usually do. But now I do have to, cover ground because the media in general continues to say that there's really not a good reason to come out and vote on November 7th. So I find that to be contradictory. Telling people how important it is to vote and how dismal our turnout was, we got to vote, and then just saying basically the race is over. So you're sending 2 different messages out, and I'm not telling the press what to do or say. I'm just saying I find that, like, if the press truly believes there's no contest here, that's fine. I mean, I'm not trying to tell them to say there is a contest if they don't think there is one. But I do think, however, that they do have to, include some coverage when you're going into a general election, when there are differences of opinions or differences in history. And I think that's important. The Republican Party's role is unknown to me at this point in time. So I can't really plan around that. What I can say is certain members of the Republican Party or city committee, I think they will be helpful, and some of them have tried to be helpful in the ways that they can. But they sometimes are limited by what the party wants, right? So that's the thing about parties. You may want to do something, but there's party discipline. So I think that's a little up in the air. When it comes to everybody else, the state party, the national party, all that kind of thing, they are typically not interested in municipal races. And I think that's a big difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is very interested in municipal races and puts a lot of effort into winning local races as a way of having influence and support for their statewide races and their national races. I think that is a smart thing to do.
Well, I guess my last question for you is, because, you mentioned, the media coverage and the fact that you were only invited to one debate, and I think it was the one I moderated.
Was that the one at Holy Family
Well, no,
University?
oh no, that one wasn't televised, the one that I moderated. So,
Yeah.
but
I was only invited to one televised debate.
okay.
Well, forum. It wasn't really a debate.
All right. Well, I guess my question for you is, are you hoping that there are more debates so there can be more of I guess, an exchange of ideas? And have you talked to the Parker campaign about this yet?
So I am drafting a letter with a proposal, because I don't want to just send a letter and say, let's talk about debates. What I want to say is, here are 10 dates for 10 debates in the 10 councilmatic districts of Philadelphia before a live audience in different locations that I hope you find to be acceptable, because that's where we had the forums at. For example, we could do it Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church, that's in the Northwest. We can do Esperanza. We had one there, in the Latino community. We can go to community college. We can go to University Penn. We had one out there, for West Philly. I think we can find suitable places to go in front of the different geographic locations of our city. And I think 10 is good. We have 10 councilmatic districts. On top of that, 5 televised debates, because we have at least roughly 5 major networks, from NBC, CBS, ABC, 17 and 29. We can certainly do that. And the other folks can come in and cover that. So I would propose that we do this before mail-in ballots start happening. There's no point in doing debates at like October 30th. Mail-in ballots have already occurred, and it's too close to the election. I think people need the time to digest, And so my point is, this is really about public service. We are running for mayor. It is a critical time. I think there are issues where there are questions. In other words, did the candidate oppose something and now is for it? Are they opposing something now that they were previously for? And that's perfectly fine. But what is that about? How credible is that? What is your reasoning? Like, can you give us your reason? Is this really just based on polling? Do you kind of campaign based on what the polls tell you to say? And what if the polls change? Or is this what you really believe in? Are you going to fight for it? Are you going to stay with it through thick and thin? So, I think that's important for people to know. And I think, people have complained about the way the debates happen. First of all, there's so many candidates. It's a 90-second answer. You really can't scratch the surface that way. They're long, and they don't get much kind of interaction between the candidates. The candidates actually know what the other candidates have said and done. I think a lot more than the moderators. Some of the moderators are very professional, and they do know a lot, but not as much as we who are there all the time interfacing with each other and know what happened behind the scenes and what the votes are and how the votes broke down and things like that. So I think that's important, because all of this is about transparency, and bringing before the voters the best type of information they can have, and certainly allowing people from the audience to ask questions and having not a 30-second or 90-second answer, but a more complete answer. So let's say maybe not as many questions, but certainly more in depth about, the questions that are most important to people. And you have enough, those are 15 different debates. It's enough to cover a lot and let people get a chance to see what they are voting for. Because this election is not about me or Sherelle Parker. This election is about the people and what they can expect or what they hope for the future, and who they're going to vote for that is going to really change what is going on right now in our city and has been for so long, to give them and their children a better life, a better future here in Philadelphia.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to give you back to my co-host, Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And candidate O, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. We would like to thank GOP mayoral candidate David O for being with us. And to his point, Denise, we will be talking about this. We will have candidate O on the program with us as we get closer to the election, because, to be perfectly blunt, he's a legitimate GOP candidate for office. And I think you're muted there, Denise.
And the thing is, the one bet I have never lost the entire time I've been covering politics is I bet the American public is going to go into a voting booth and do something you didn't expect. I made that bet in 2016, and while I cleaned up on gas money, we got Donald Trump. So what everyone needs to remember here is that we still have an election in November. You need to get out and vote. You need to hear what the candidates are saying. You need to ask follow-up questions, because now there are fewer people to ask them of.
That's right. Lance, you had a piece in this week's Tuesday newsletter that was kind of terrifying. For those who may not have seen it, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. I think many people know about these Ring doorbells, which are cameras. They're sold all the time as a way to protect your house. People put them in their homes, in their bedrooms, in their living rooms, sometimes to keep track of the nanny, sometimes to make sure that everything's all right. These new devices, or relatively new devices, connect to your computer. But for most people, that's not enough. They're not just looking for the instantaneous feed. They want a continual recording, so that if someone's breaking into their house or stealing their packages, or there's some problem with the person who's taking care of their child, they can have a recording. So when Amazon, which was not the original owner of Ring Camera, but when Amazon bought them, they set up a subscription. So for a couple dollars a month, you could have Amazon record keep all of the recordings from the video cameras. And they did this, and they did it for years and years and years. And the cameras are marketed very heavily. And in cities like Philadelphia, where unfortunately we're struggling through a very difficult time with crime and with people who are struggling to make ends meet, the success is tremendous. They have a very large market. But what they don't tell us is, how secure are you in these recordings? Who gets to look at them? Who gets to see them? And what happens if they get hacked? And for years and years and years, no one was asking these questions. And finally, the Federal Trade Commission, which often goes by the name of the FTC, which is a government department, prosecuted the Ring camera for allowing its employees to view the videos, even if the video was called bathroom or called bedroom or called living room. And they apparently had no rules. So any employee, for any reason, could decide that they were going to look at these videos, copy them, sell them, put them on the internet. And they got caught. And this is something that the Federal Trade Commission says happens on a regular basis. They have a few examples in their filing. What happens is the Federal Trade Commission files a lawsuit with allegations, and they say there was one person who was spying on women and was using their recordings to be able to just focus on women in compromised positions. And no one at Ring Camera was doing anything about it. Finally, there was someone at Ring who was a whistleblower who called it to the attention of the management, and then it still didn't stop. One of the other things is that these Ring cameras, you can actually speak through them. And so a number of people were hacking into the Ring cameras and actually making demands of people who had the cameras in their house. And some of these demands are very upsetting. They're propositioning teenage girls. They are telling people they have to send them money. They are telling elderly residents who are struggling with health what's going to happen to them if they don't send money to them. And these things were all happening, and the Federal Trade Commission finally decided that it was going to prosecute. Now, Amazon didn't own Ring at the time many of these things happened, and Amazon is saying that they're going to do their best to contact the people whose pictures were exploited, whose privacy was invaded, and let them know about it. But here's the remarkable thing as far as I'm concerned. Nobody's going to jail. No one's going to be prosecuted criminally. Amazon has to pay a $5,800,000 fine, which when you break down how much Amazon makes, that's a little bit less than 10 minutes of their profit. So it's really not a very significant amount of money for Amazon. It really doesn't put an end to it. There's nobody who's going to be making sure this happens. Amazon is going to have to make regular reports to the Federal Trade Commission that it is self-policing and it is correcting it. And they're supposed to be sending notices out to everyone who has one of these cameras, asking them who will they authorize to look at the videos that are being recorded. But it just raises the question of how much of this new technology are we not thinking about? How much of these Alexa or Google or voice activated or visual cameras are invading our privacy in ways that we can't even imagine? As technology advances, I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, unless we're there protecting our rights, protecting our privacy, we can expect the corporations to do what they can to make as much money as possible. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why people go into business. They go into business to make money. They don't go into business to be social workers. But if we're not cautious, if we're not careful, if we don't think about what the possible outcome is, we're going to have more and more moments where we wake up and we find out that the Federal Trade Commission has found a company like Ring has allowed its workers to view people in compromised positions and sell it. They copy the videos and then sell them. And that's something that I'm not alleging. It's something that I'm not saying could happen. I'm saying the Federal Trade Commission found that this did happen, and Amazon is saying yes, while they're not admitting to wrongdoing because they didn't own the company at the time. Yes, it happened, and they're going to pay the fine, and they're going to take steps to limit who can look at the videos.
No. What I don't understand is, would it be hard to figure out who in the company was doing this? That
you would think it would be easy because they had a whistleblower. But
yeah,
one of the things that they did was they were contracting out for help. The growth model, the industry in some ways fooled itself. When they started selling these, they had no idea how quickly the market was going to grow. And so as a result, as the market grew faster and faster, they didn't have enough workers, so they just contracted out. And as they were contracting out, what they were seeing was less and less control over the employees. And you would think it'd be relatively easy to figure out who was doing this and relatively easy to prosecute them. But typically the Federal Trade Commission just signs consent agreements. And the people who were injured aren't even guaranteed to get any of that money. So the $5.8 million, and that's really nothing. I mean, again, we're talking about Amazon. It's less than 10 minutes of their time. But of that $5.8 million, none goes to the young woman who was being spied upon. None goes to the elderly person who was being threatened. None goes to any of those people. It all goes to the Federal Trade Commission, and the compensation for people who were injured, they would have to do it on their own. And of course, it becomes very difficult for most people to hire a lawyer to pursue a claim like that.
Yeah, almost nobody can do that.
Right. So I think as we go forward, we think about all these wonderful technologies. We those of us in my age bracket now have computers in our pockets that are much more powerful than the computers we used in college. But what's the cost, and what is it doing to us, and what kind of society are we looking forward to? It is true that many people feel threatened, and many people are struggling with crime and struggling with the thought that they're not feeling safe, or they're feeling society is not as civil as it once was. And understandably, people want to make themselves and their families safe. And that's how these are marketed. So it's unfortunate that companies like Google and Amazon don't spend the money to help better schools, don't spend the money to pay people better, don't do what they can to help create living wage jobs, but instead make money out of the struggles in our society.
No, they just send their owner in a rocket ship. That is useless to the atmosphere or whatever that they do.
So,
My sister has one of these Ring cameras at her house. And when I read your piece, I'm supposed to go see her this weekend. I think I'm going to tell her you need to take that down.
So the real horror are the people who are putting them up as nanny cams in the bedrooms and in the living rooms. And again, understandably, it's your child. The most important thing in the world to you. I think that's human to want to make sure that whoever's taking care of your kid is treating them well, but it never turns off. We never turn them off. So yes, maybe there's some reason to want to have some way of looking at how your nanny or your child care giver or your babysitter is treating your kid, but then you don't turn it off, and whatever private moments you have in your house are no longer private. And the doorbell again gets shared with the police on a regular basis. The police access them. If you're online, join Nextdoor Online, which is a neighborhood online service. People will often say, "Hey, my car was hit. I live at 6th and Dickinson. My car was hit. Anyone have any Ring video so I can see what car hit it?" And again, we're living through a time when it's very difficult to figure out what do we do to protect ourselves. What do we do to make society more human, more livable, and more loving? Somebody drives down the street, hits a car, and drives off, and understandably, people are upset about it. But is the solution really to turn everything over to, I guess, literally a big brother, someone who's just watching everything and not telling you what they're watching?
Well, Lance, thank you so much for that. Denise, what do we got coming this Friday? I think I already know, actually.
Well, the Citizens Police Accountability Commission, CPOC, is short 3 members because three members, including the vice chair, resigned last week. So this week's column is on why that might have happened and why people should be concerned about it, especially since every mayoral candidate who ran for the primary and who is running for the general has promised an increased police department.
That's going to become more important as we get closer to the election and beyond the election. I'd like to thank everybody for watching. Just so everybody knows, I just got an update. We do not have a city budget yet, but we expect that, or at least the first budget bill to be out of committee sometime, maybe this week or early next week is kind of what we're looking at. They had a meeting today about it, but it hasn't happened yet. So we're waiting to see about that. We'd like to thank you all for being with us, and we will see you next week on Hall Monitor.